Chapter 15, The Exiled Seer. The dream began as all the others did, shrouded in mist and riddled with a sense of unease. Elowen stood in a vast void, a place where the sky bled colours that did not belong to the waking world. Wisps of silver and violet drifted like ink in water, surrounding her in a dreamscape, both haunting and mesmerising. The air was thick with the scent of old parchment and candle smoke, and beneath her feet the ground was a tapestry of shifting visions, echoes of the past and whispers of the future. Then, from the shadows, came a voice, low, measured, ancient. "You have your father's eyes, child, and his burdens." Elowen turned swiftly, her breath catching in her throat. Before her stood a figure clad in tattered robes, his form half drenched in the swirling mist. His hair, once jet black, had faded to a silvered grey, and his piercing eyes gleamed like polished obsidian, deep, knowing and filled with secrets. The weight of his gaze was suffocating, like he could see through her soul and into the bloodline that bound her to something far older than the kingdom itself. He was unfamiliar, and yet he wasn't. "Who are you?" Elowen demanded, standing tall despite the way the dream seemed to press in around her. The man gave a small, knowing smirk. "I am the shadow in your bloodline, the whisper your father tried to forget. I am Selim Vane." The name struck her like a bolt of lightning. Elowen staggered back, her pulse racing. Selim Vane. The name was forbidden. It was a name that should not exist. A name erased from history. And yet here he was, the exiled seer. The forgotten truth. Elowen struggled to recall anything about him. Why did she know this name? Why did it feel like she was reaching for something that had been deliberately torn away from her memory? She had spent countless hours poring over the kingdom's histories, studying her father's past, and yet there had never been a mention of a Selim Vane. Not once. It was as if he had been scrubbed from existence. "You should not exist," Elowen whispered, unable to keep the tremor from her voice. Calum let out a bitter chuckle. "No, child, it is not that I should not exist. It is that I was made not to." He took a step forward, the dream rippling with his movement. "Your father, your beloved, noble father, banished me. He cast me into the void and ordered my name stricken from the records. Every book, every scroll, every bard's tale that spoke of me was erased. And do you know why, Elowen?" Elowen shook her head, her breath shallow. Calum's eyes burned with something between resentment and pity. "Because I saw what was coming. The world around them shifted, and suddenly visions flickered in the mist. Shattered crowns, burning cities, bloodied fields. Elowen felt a cold dread seep into her bones. I warned him of the darkness buried in your family's veins, the very bloodline you now seek to understand, and for that he silenced me." Her hands clenched into fists. Was this the truth? Had her father truly known about the corruption in their family and cast away the only man who had tried to stop it? The thought burned in her chest. "Where are you?" she demanded. "If you're alive, where have you been?" Salem smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "In exile, of course. But I am watching, child. I see the threads of fate twisting, and I see the choices before you. You must decide whether to follow the path your father walked, or forge one of your own." The mist around them thickened, pulling him away, his figure beginning to dissolve. "Wait," Elowen called, stepping forward. "What should I do? How do I find you?" His final words echoed as the dream faded. "Follow the forgotten places, seek what was erased, and when the time comes, choose wisely, child, for the gods are watching." Awakening to a lost name, Elowen gasped awake, her chest rising and falling rapidly. The dream lingered like a ghost in her mind. Calum Vane was real. He had been erased from history, but he was alive. And worst of all, her father had known about the corruption in their family. She sat up, trembling, her fingers gripping the sheets. She needed to find him. She needed to uncover the truth that had been buried. But even as she resolved herself, she couldn't shake the growing dread in her heart. If Selim Vane had truly foreseen the kingdom's downfall once before, then what had he seen coming now? Chapter 15, The Exiled Seer, Part 2. Morning had barely broken when Elowen sat at her desk, quill in hand, staring at the blank parchment before her. Her mind still reeled from the dream. The name Selim Vane burned into her thoughts like a brand. He was real, he was alive, and she was trapped in the castle, unable to pursue the truth herself. She clenched her jaw. Then my allies will be my hands, where I cannot go. She turned to Celine, who stood by her side, always vigilant. I need word sent to our allies. If Selim Vane truly lives, then we must find him. Celine gave a firm nod, already moving to gather her materials. Lyra will have the best access to old records. She might find traces of where he was last seen before his exile. Sir Garin has contacts within the Knights. If any old soldiers remember the seer, they might know something. Elric is still away in the Emerald City, but I can send word to him in case the Covenant has hidden archives on the matter. Elowen exhaled, relieved. Good. And Alistair? She hesitated. Alistair had not responded to her last message. She knew why. His father was dying. She could picture it now, the once mighty king, frail and weakened, the weight of the kingdom pressing onto his son's shoulders before he was even crowned. Celine's face softened. Alistair has other battles to fight right now. We should not burden him with this until he is ready. Elowen swallowed hard and nodded. She hated waiting. She hated feeling useless. But Celine was right. She pressed her fingers to her temples. Then let's focus on who we can reach.
The allies respond.
Over the next few days, responses arrived. Some swift, others slower. Lyra, ever eager when it came to uncovering lost knowledge, dug into the archives with a fervour bordering on obsession. Her reply was short but promising. The records have been purged, but I have my ways. There are whispers of a ruined observatory where seers once lived. I will send more when I find it. Sir Garan, ever the stoic knight, had been more cautious. His reply was measured, but hinted at concern. Some among the old guard still remember the name, though they speak of him as one speaks of a ghost. There was mention of a hidden monastery where exiled sages were sent. I will inquire further. Elric, though away, had managed to send word from the Emerald City, albeit with a warning. The name Selim Vane is still known in whispers among the scholars of the Covenant, but many are wary of speaking of him. I am looking into it, but there are eyes on me. If he is alive, someone doesn't want him found. Elowen gripped the letters in her hands, reading and rereading them. Someone does not want him found. That meant she was on the right path. But Alistair had not answered. She found herself watching the castle gates, waiting for any word from him, but none came. She had written him once more, but the parchment sat unanswered. She knew where he was. He was at his father's bedside. And deep in her heart, she knew what was coming. The king would not survive the week. Alistair would soon no longer be a prince. He would be the heir to the throne. And with that, everything would change. A decision looms. As the sun set over the castle walls, Elowen stood at her window, Celine at her side. We will find Calum, she said, gripping the letters. Even if the past tries to remain buried, I will uncover it. Celine smirked, arms crossed. I figured you'd say that. I'll keep the letters coming, and if we need to move in secret, I'll make sure the path is open. Closed her eyes, letting the cool night air fill her lungs. There were many battles ahead, political, magical and personal, but Selim Vane was alive, and she would find him. Chapter 15, The Exiled Seer, Part 3. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of burning flesh and charred stone. Elowen stood in the great hall, but it was no longer the sanctuary of her childhood. The banners of her family hung in tatters stained with blood. The grand chandeliers had fallen, their golden chains shattered, their candles melting into pools of wax and gore. Before her, bodies lay in heaps, knights, servants, nobles. All lifeless, their eyes hollow, their mouths frozen in silent screams. The very walls of the castle groaned, cracking beneath the weight of a power too great for the world to contain. And in the centre of it all, she saw herself. Sitting upon a dark throne, clad in robes spun from shadow, a crown of jagged obsidian resting upon her brow. Her own hands were stained black with blood, veins twisting like cursed roots beneath her skin. And at her feet, the bodies of those she held dear. Selene, Alastair, Lyra, Elric. Their bodies broken, discarded, as if they had never mattered. She could hear the whispers, hymns sung in the dark tongue, the voices of those long forgotten. They praised her, adored her, worshipped her as the Dark Queen, as the one who had claimed her birthright. Her own voice, distant yet near, spoke the words that sealed it all. Bow, kneel, serve me, and I will spare what remains. And before her, the last of her kingdom, chained, beaten and trembling, lowered their heads. Elowen screamed, but no sound came. She wanted to turn away, to wake up, to escape this horrific fate, but she was forced to watch, to see each step, to witness how she would destroy her own people, her own kingdom, with her own hands. She saw herself fall, not to the blade of a hero, not to the might of an army, but to isolation, despair, and the unrelenting whispers of the dark god. The shadows curled around her, whispering the truth she had tried to deny. You were always meant to reign. You were always meant to rule. And then, a voice low and smooth, filled with endless patience. Daughter of my blood, why do you resist? She turned, and there it stood. The evil god. It did not take one form. It was ever shifting, moving like a tapestry woven of shadow and forgotten time. Its eyes, dozens, hundreds, thousands, opened and closed, peering into her soul. A mouth curled into a smile that held the promise of endless power, endless dominion. You see the truth now. Your kingdom will fall, your people will suffer, your loved ones will die, and all of it, every ounce of pain, will be for nothing unless you take what is yours. The world around her burned, but the god's voice was calm, patient, inviting. I offer you the only path where you survive, the only path where you rule unchallenged, the only path where your people still exist. Elowen's hands trembled, her breath ragged. She wanted to deny it, she wanted to call it a lie, but the nightmare was too vivid. She had seen her kingdom burn, she had seen her people slaughtered, she had seen herself become this monster. The evil god stepped closer, extending a hand, not in force but in invitation. Choose, child, choose before it is too late. For the first time, Elowen did not recoil. She did not cower. Instead, she met the god's gaze, and she spoke with knowledge she was never meant to have. You fear the chains, the god's form twisted, recoiling at the words. You fear the laws that bound you. You fear the heavenly chains that trapped you in this age. The throne room flickered, the fire dimming, the whispers faltered, uncertain. For the first time, the evil god did not smile. Who told you this? Elowen stood her ground. You will not seduce me with power, not without a contract, not without binding terms. The god's form trembled, shadows writhing with growing agitation. You know not what you meddle with. Elowen took a step forward, her fear melting into resolve. Then tell me. The god's many eyes narrowed. Its form shuddered, twisting violently as the dreamscape began to crumble. I will not be bound again. Darkness surged, swallowing her whole. And then Elowen gasped awake, her body drenched in sweat. The room was dark, save for the flickering candlelight. Selene, ever watchful, stirred from her chair nearby, her hand instinctively reaching for her blade. Princess? Elowen clutched her sheets, breathing heavily. She had forced the god to retreat. She had found its fear, and now she knew. If she could learn more about the chains, she could control this. The dark god had given her more than just a nightmare. It had given her a weakness to exploit.